Right here. I didn't get the initial. Did I start last night? Yeah, in October. Exactly. Right.
Okay, you're good.
Okay. It's on? Whatever you tell me. I work here. Okay. Okay, good morning. I want to talk about the various different Purims that made it onto the Jewish calendar that aren't the regular Purim. All the Purims besides the regular Purim. It's going to be a drop anachronistic because B'atzim I should really start with the state of the concept that there could be an additional Purim, but we'll get to that still, like what the state of that is. But for now, let's just start with some of the different examples and we'll work our way through. So the most famous additional Purim on the calendar, L'chaira, is the Purim of the Tosfos Yomtov. Now, the Purim of the Tosfos Yomtov is as follows. The Tosfos Yomtov made a Zera on his family, for all future Deiros, that on Beis Rosh Chodesh Adar, they should have a Suda, they should read a Megillah, they should celebrate for the nest that happened to him. Now, I'll tell over that story of the Tosfos Yomtov a little bit without going into exactly the ability of one to be geyser a Purim for his family, for L'Olmei Elamim. But let's talk about the story of the Tosfos Yomtov and then maybe a second one. So the Tosfos Yomtov is living Pachas Yeiser, I don't know, let's say, 1600s more or less. The Tosfos Yomtov starts off his career as the Rav of a small city, then he moves to Vienna, and then he moves to Prague, where he becomes a big Rav. Mechaber Svarim, big Rav, he publishes his Svarim on the Mishnah, Tosfos Yomtov. He publishes his Sefer on the Rush, Lachem Chamudis. Tosfos Yomtov becomes a very, very big Rav in Prague. He's a Rav in Prague for, I think, for 20 years or something like that, a long time. He married into a Prague family. The Horowitz family was a wealthy Prague family that Tosfos Yomtov married into. Ad Kedikach that some of his letters from his early Tkufa in Prague, he signs himself as Yomtov Lipman Heller, Chassan Lebeis Horowitz. Like his yichus was that he was an Edom of that family in Prague. That was like what gave him his standing. Now, Tosfos Yomtov becomes a Rav in Prague for a long time, and eventually, at some point, Prague, due to a war, really, there was something called the 30-Year War at that time in Europe, which was basically there was the Protestants came and tried to reform Christianity. They wanted to change all sorts of things, and the anti-Reformation people fought against the Protestants, and this devolved into something called the 30-Year War. Where basically, they were fighting. It was Austria and other governments were fighting with each other for a very continuous amount of time, and it produced a lot of refugees. And the population of Prague, the Jewish population of Prague, swelled like crazy numbers, and it became a very, very big city. But it had a ton of very poor people living in the city at that time. And there started to be a big fight how exactly the membership payment structure should be. Should the rich people be carrying more of the load? Should it be by head? And there was a big fight. And obviously the older Kehillah members, some things never change. Obviously the older Kehillah members, the richer, well-established Kehillah members, felt that anyone new should have to pay in, and it's not our job to carry the load for everybody. And the newer people said, listen, we're poor, you guys are rich, you're well-established, you're the hosting committee, you have to pick up the tab. And this became a big fight between the two different groups in Prague. Now, obviously, the Rav of the city was involved in this. We don't know exactly what his involvement was, but he was involved. And he was also more allied with the well-established older bishpachas in the city. So he was connected to the side that said that everyone should pay in and not just the rich Kehillah members who are supporting the Kehillah. Now, at some point, somebody mastered on him to the emperor that he's anti-Christianity, was supposedly the charge. And the way that they proved this was mamish like lazy. It just shows you how low the burden of evidence was. They went to the Hakdama to his Sefer Lachem Chamudis on the Rush, where literally for half a page he says about the chshivas of the Talmud, the milas of the Gemara. They said, you see, you're pro-Gemara, and Gemara the Pope already burnt in 1536. So if the Pope felt that Gemara is negative and he burnt it, and you're pro-Gemara, you're obviously anti the Pope and you're anti-Christianity, and that was enough of a charge in those days. Now, he writes the story in great detail. He says he was sitting he was in yeshiva learning one day, and he gets a message that a judge, he calls him, but it probably just means like a messenger from the judge or a police officer is around looking for me. He says, I became very fearful, and I ran to the home of the Parnas HaKahal, like the richest guy in town. The guy's name is Yitzchak Basevi, is probably the way to pronounce it today. It's really Basevi is Basheva. Like his mother must have been rich, or his grandmother must have been rich. His name was Yitzchak Basevi, and he ran to his house, and he locks himself up there. He sends a message to the judge that he's willing to talk. Let's make up a time to meet. Makes up a time with the judge to meet, and the judge tells him, I was sent here on a message from the emperor in Vienna to arrest you and to bring you back to Vienna. And he says, arrest me, maybe we could negotiate. Could you give us a little bit of time to see if we could do anything about it? The officer says, no problem. You look like not a flight risk, so I'll allow it. And he sends a mishlachas of messengers, goes to the local duke's house. He writes that they get there in the middle of the night, and everything's dark and closed, and we pound on the gate, and nobody hears us. It takes us minutes and minutes of pounding until finally somebody hears us. The duke's servants come out wiping their eyes. What's going on? We need an emergency. We have to talk to the duke. And okay, let's see what we could do. The duke buys him a little bit of leeway, but not much, just a few days to organize his affairs, and ultimately he's able to surrender himself. Instead of being arrested and hauled out, he's able to surrender himself. So he surrenders himself to the government of Vienna. They put him under house arrest first in Vienna, and he's there for several weeks while they're negotiating the case, and ultimately the emperor says he needs to be in prison, not in house arrest, and the Yomtov goes to prison, real prison, for 60 days. Now, actually, one of Rembrandt's understudies was in Vienna at the time and painted a sketch of the Tosfos Yomtov peering out the bars of the prison. So we have actually almost a picture of the Tosfos Yomtov while he was in prison. It's like a picture of a very sad, middle-aged man, peering out between a few bars. I'll find it after. So he was in prison for 60 days, and it's had a very, very big effect on him. He felt very, very, very victimized. Meaning, he writes in how sad he is about this and whatever. And the interesting nakuda to note is that nowhere in this document is he blaming the emperor. The emperor is just doing the job of policing the state. He blames the other Jews and the fighting within the community that led to this breakdown that had him arrested. Now, ultimately, he's hauled before court, and they bring up his Hakdama to Madani Melech, and they say, look, you're anti the church because you're pro-Gemara. And he says, listen, I understand that the Pope burnt the Shas, and that means that in the big scheme of things, Shas is a bad thing. But you understand that for us Jews, Shas is still our document. I was preaching to a Jewish audience. I wasn't talking at all to anybody out. Of course I'm masking that in the street, Shas is not, doesn't hold water. Within a Jewish audience, I'm just talking to what they're used to and whatever. Essentially a plea for religious liberty, which is something that, of course, didn't exist in the 1600s. And the case is gedant, and the emperor decides that he has to pay 12,000, whatever the currency of the day is, 12,000 Reichsteller is his knas. Now 12,000 Reichsteller is obviously a lot of money, because Tosfos Yomtov was not poor. He came from a wealthy family, he had some holdings, he had some money, but he says that this is way more than he could ever come up with. So he petitions the emperor, listen, please, I don't have this money, could you cut me some slack, could it be less than this? And then the emperor turns on the threats, and the emperor tells him, if I don't have this money, I'll haul you back into prison, I'll beat you, I'll whip you, I'll imprison your entire family, I'll destroy the village, the threats, and he writes all these threats, the threats that pour out of the emperor. And he says, okay, fine, I'm going to come up with the money. They petition a little more, which is Sadlanim, and finally they settle on 10,000 Reichstaler. That's the amount that they'll pay, and that will do the job. So he says he had to first come up with the first bunch of it. He got a payment plan from the judge. The first bunch of it, he made a down payment of 2,000 Reichstaler, and with that, he was freed from prison. And then over the next 6 months, he had to make payments, 2,000, 2,000, 2,000, until they were paid up. Now, so the Tosfos Yomtov writes all this. It's not very long. It's like a small kuntris. Tosfos Yomtov writes this, and he calls it Megillas Eva. Like a play on Megillas Eicha, Megillah. Eva is an acronym for Eicha Yashva Vadad Ha'ir. The first 4 words of Megillas Eicha is Eva, Aleph Yod Vez Hey. So he calls this Megillas Eva, like Al Shem Eicha, and he writes this all down, and then eventually, so 1 second. So he writes this all down, this whole sad part of the story, and then he writes that because of this, he's being geyser a tainus on his family, that on Hey Tammuz, which was the day that everything really went to pot, everyone, all of my children and grandchildren at Seif Kalderis have to fast on this day. He says, and I know that it's the middle of the summer, it's a very long fast day, so you only have to fast until they're done davening Ma'ariv. Now, in Europe, and still today, in Europe, they don't daven Ma'ariv at Seis. It's way too late. In Europe, in the summer, Ma'ariv could be at 11 o'clock, a real Ma'ariv. So they daven Ma'ariv earlier, like after Mincha Gedela,
I think. Mincha Ketana maybe. I don't know. They daven Mincha Ma'ariv much earlier. So he writes, until you daven Ma'ariv is enough. Not more than that. If it falls out on Erev Shabbos and Nidcha, he figures out the whole system for the fast day. Now, he writes, he comes back to Prague, and he's ready to go back to Steller, right? He comes back after, he finally squeaked back home after paying all these fines, whatever, he wants to go back to Steller. And they notify him that the Rabbanus is gone. It's over for you. And he says, I don't understand what happened. Why would, what did I do? Why did I lose it? And tell him it's just, and he doesn't understand the conspiracy behind it. He's not sure why they're pushing him out. But the idea that's given is that it's just too risky to have a Rav who was under arrest, someone who's under the radar, who's on the radar already of the government. It's too risky for the Kilo of Prague to take away his Steller. Now he really feels broken. He's like, he came home at the end of all this and he has nothing left. His Svarim were confiscated, all his possessions were confiscated. He doesn't have a home, he doesn't have a Steller, he's nothing. He's left, mamish, stripped of everything. And this is a few months of this situation. And then eventually he gets invited to become the Rav in Krakow, which is a Polish town which is not under the dominion of the Viennese government. And he goes to Krakow and he becomes a Rav in Krakow. Now, the day that he becomes a Rav in Krakow is Hey Adar. Hey Adar is the day he becomes a Rav in Krakow. And because of that, he writes that on Beis, the Rish Chodesh Adar, meaning the beginning of Adar, I'm being kaveh for my whole family a Yomtov. Meaning, so he makes a tainus on the day when everything's bad. And on the day of Rosh Chodesh Adar, which is the Haskalah of Marbim B'Simcha, when things started going better for me, I'm making a Yomtiv for all my dairies for the future, that they should always celebrate on this day. And the way he says it is they should read the Megillas Eva like a Megillah, meaning it's a Me'en Purim. Just like Purim, you read a Megillah and you have a Suda and you celebrate, so my whole Mishpacha should read this Megillah and celebrate. Now, he rather writes that the reason why I wrote this Megillah is to tell everyone, to teach everyone, that even if things seem really, really bleak and there's no way out, you should know someone could lose everything and they could get back on their feet. That's his. You could lose everything you have. Your money, your shtela, your svarim, whatever is important to you. You could lose it and you could still get back on your feet. So that's why I'm writing this. Now he writes that they should lay in this Megillah and etc. Now, so without going into the ability of one to be geyser on his family, such a thing. This is the concept of a Purim. Call it a Purim Sheni. There's an idea called the Purim Sheni where someone could have a second Purim every year. And there's dozens of these for all Tfutzos of Klal Yisrael. Literally dozens of these Purims that are on the books. Purim Reinus, Purim Reisha, Purim Pressburg, Purim the Yavitz has Rabbi Yaakov Emden has a family Purim, the Yomtov has a family Purim, the Chayadim has a family Purim, and maybe we'll get into some more of them over time, but there's literally dozens of these. And Lemaisa, none of them survived. Kemat, none of them survived into this generation, right? Kemat, none of them survived into our generation. The only one that Taka survived into this generation is the Purim of the Taisis Yomtov. There are families that get together still today and they make a Suda for the Purim of the Taisis Yomtov. Now no one could really tell you why none of these Purims survived into the modern era, like why they disappeared. The Menashe Klein has a tshuva where he suggests that after World War I and World War II, after real tsaros were faced, the whole idea of celebrating a minor victory that someone had in 1550 was that's not, it just didn't do it for people anymore. That's what Menashe Klein suggests. But again, this is a suggestion, not something that he's saying. In fact, it's a suggestion that the whole allure of these Purims wore off when people really were faced with serious tsaros. Now, these are all still personal Purims, right? These are all going to be examples of personal Purims that personal families, personal cities celebrate. There is a Purim, Sheni, a secondary Purim, that's in Shulchan Aruch that everybody celebrates, ostensibly, that everyone could celebrate. And that's Purim Katan. And that only falls out in a year like this year, where we have two Adars. So when you have Adar Rishon, Yud Dalid La Adar Rishon is called Purim Katan. It's called the small Purim, meaning this would be the month that could have been Adar. This is the small Purim. So now, I just want to go into that a little bit and show where that comes from and what the different minhagim of Purim Katan are that we have in such a year. So the Mishnah in Megillah and Daf Vav and Beis says as follows. This is a famous line in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, "Ein bein Adar Rishon la'Adar Hasheni, ela kriyas Megillah matanas lavyanim." Everybody knows this. The only difference between Adar Rishon and Adar Hasheni is the mitzvah of kriyas Megillah matanas lavyanim. Now the Gemara continues, and the Gemara says that ba'atzim we paskin like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. Shimon ben Gamliel and Rav Shimon ben Yosi. Af karin nesiv Adar Hasheni shekol mitzvahs sheneheges b'sheni ein neheges b'rishon. We be'ikar din paskin that all mitzvahs that are neheges on Adar Sheni are not neheges on Adar Rishon, but v'shavin behesped v'tainis asurim b'zeh b'zeh. They're similar in regards to hesped and tainis, that the Adar Rishon, the Purim of Adar Rishon, is also asur v'hesped and tainis, just like the Purim of Adar Sheni. Now the Gemara explains what the rationale for the Rabbi Yossi Shita is. The Gemara says, for Rav Shimon Gamliel Shita is, the Gemara says, mismach geula legeula adif. The reason why you read Megillah during Adar Sheni and not during Adar Rishon is because the Geula of Pesach is coming up. We want to be masmech the Geula of Purim to the Geula of Pesach and not stretch it so far apart. If you read it in Adar Rishon, you have Adar, Purim over here, Pesach's 2 months later. We like it to be close together. That's the rationale for this shita. And as is gepasken in Shulchan Aruch, that we read the Megillah and Matanos Avyayin and all the mitzvahs hayom on Adar Sheni and not on Adar Rishon. Now, Tosfos Afanor over here brings something interesting. Tosfos says as follows. Tosfos says, "V'yesh noigin lasses yimei mishta v'simcha v'arba aser b'chamisha aser shel Adar Rishon." He says there are those who have a minig. This is not in the Gemara. There are those who have a minig to make a simcha, a suda, on the 14th and the 15th of Adar Rishon. V'rehita de masnis and nami mashmakein. The basic words of the Mishnah seem like this, because the Mishnah says, "Ein bein Adar Rishon l'Adar Sheni ella Megillah v'matanos Avyayin." But it sounds like Suda, Mishta, being thankful to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That still exists. That's the Rehita de Masnisa. He says, Mechad l'ni Mishta v'simcha zev zeh. He says, V'lei nehira, because the Gemara says clearly, Haleinin hesped v'tainis zev zeh. The Gemara says they're only similar to Gabi hesped v'tainis. So the Gemara tells you, don't misunderstand the Mishnah, that there's a diak, that they're similar in a lot of ways. They're only similar to Gabi hesped v'tainis. So Tosfos tells you the Mishnah is mashma one way, the Gemara is straightening out the Mishnah and being mashma a different way. So there's no real reason for this many. But yesh noigin. There's a cute line that they say over B'Shem Kveger. I'll say in a second. So Tosfos says this that there's a minig like this, but that you don't really have to keep this minig because the Gemara is mashma not like this. The Gemara is mashma that the only similarity is the Gabi Hesed V'Tayin is nothing more than that. Now, if you look in Shulchan Aruch. In Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Tafresh Tzadik Zayin, it says as follows. The Mechaber says, Yom Yodalad v'Tesvav Sheba Adar B'Rishon, Ein Neufel Al Pneim ve'Einam Mizmar Chashem B'Yemtzar v'Asurim B'Hesped V'Tainis, Aval Shar Dvarim Ein Noigim. The Mechaber passes like the Gemara straight up. Hesped V'Tainis you can't do during Adar Rishon, but everything else is allowed. Yesh Imrim, the Af Hesped V'Tainis Mutar. The Mechaber says it's possible even Hesped and Tainis is mutter during Adar Rishon. Says the Ramah, Hagah. A minik is for Rishon. That is the minik, that you don't have to do anything special for Purim Katan. But Yesha Imrim Shechayiv Laharvis B'Mishta V'Simcha. There is those who say, like Tosfos says, to be Marva V'Simcha, V'Yadal Shabbat Rishon, V'Ein Noyigin Kain. But Mikol Makim Yarbik Tas V'Suda, a little bit you should do K'dei Latzis Yidei Machmirim. To be Yoytze the day of Machmirim, that said you should have a Purim Katan. And then the Ramah ends off with this very interesting line that a lot of ink has been spilled on to explain. It says the Ramah V'Toiv Leiv Mishta Tamid. It's good to be happy always. That's the Ramah's last line. Now this is the last Ramah in Orach Chaim. This is the last words in Orach Chaim. V'Toiv Leiv Mishta Tamid. That's what the Ramah says. So, the Shari Tshuva brings down from the Birkei Yosef from the Chidah that the Ramah in the beginning of Orach Chaim, and Orach Chaim Siman Aleph says Shivisi Hashem Lenegdi Samid, which means you have to have Yirah Shemayim. Hashem, you should be fearful of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a minute. So he ends off V'toiv Leiv Mishta Tamid, but with a joyfulness, with a lightness. Like these two things balance each other out. I started off with Shivisi Hashem Lenegdi Samid, V'toiv Leiv Mishta Tamid, like balance it out. And he does a play on words. These are the Shnei Tmidim Shebachal Yom. The person has to have two Tamids, like the Karban Tamid. These are the Shnei Tmidim Shebachal Yom. The balance of joy and fear. That's what the Chidah says. Rabbi Kveger has a fascinating thing that he says on this Ramah. Rabbi Kveger says, there's Gemara in Sanhedrin that says, that darshans this pasuk. The pasuk says, Kol Yimei Ani Ra. It's a pasuk of Mishlei. All the days of an Ani are bad. The Toiv Leiv Mishta Tamid. That's the pasuk. So the Gemara in Sanhedrin darshans, Kol Yimei Ani Ra, Elu Bali Talmud. Those are people who are learning Gemara, Sugyas. Sugyas are hard. Kol Yimei Ani Ra. It's confusing, it's not clear, it's difficult. The Toiv Leiv Mishta Tamid, Elu Bali Mishnah. Those who learn Mishnayos, that's simple, it's straightforward. You know what you're getting. It says it clearly. There's not too much difficulty. So, Kol Yimei Ani Ra is Gemara, Toiv Leiv Mishta Tamid is Mishnayos. So says Rabbi Kveger, Tosfos tells you that the diak of the Mishnah was you have to make a Purim Katan. Because the Mishnah says, Ein Bein. It's mashma, they're the same. You make a Purim Katan. The Gemara comes and complicates it. The Gemara muddies the water. The Gemara says, no, only Hesped V'Tainis, a diak ahin, diak aher. So the Ramah ends off with Toiv Leiv Mishta Tamid. If you're a Mishnah dikiyid, if you're reading the Mishnah says to do this. That's his play on words. This is Rabbi Kveger said, this is what the Ramah's play on words. What the Ramah wants to tell you is like, it's not a din. It's a diak from the Mishnah, but Toiv Leiv Mishta Tamid. If you follow the Mishnah, then this is a good diak, a minig type. Now, this minig of Purim Katan, so the Ramah brings it down, and it happens to be, it's a really Ashkenazi minig. The minig to actually adhere to this is like a Yakisha minig. The Makairis, the people who did it, is the Leket Yosher, for example, which is an Ashkenazi minig sefer, says that the minig was to have an extra dish on that day. And, not a whole suda, you have an extra dish, eat something extra. And in other svarim it's brought down to eat, to einim on that day, something, just like a treat, something special to eat on that day. Actually, the whole word Purim Katan, the Ramah doesn't call it Purim Katan. The Ramah just says on Yudal Levad Rishon, the phrase Purim Katan that this is called comes from the Maril, which is the Aviv Minig Ashkenaz. Meaning the whole word Purim Katan, it's a very Ashkenazi minig. And if you look in the Beis Yosef in Tafresh Tzadik Zayin, you'll see the Beis Yosef is not Geiris this thing. By the Sfardim, this is not a thing. The Beis Yosef is not Geiris. The Beis Yosef says Purim Katan is nothing. Like the Gemara says, it's not a thing. Like Taisa says, it's not a thing. Now, in Ashkenazim, they coined the phrase called Purim Katan, and they're the ones who added these minhagim. Now, incidentally, the Rabbeinu Peretz is one of the most explicit of it. The Rabbeinu Peretz in his Haggayis on the Tashbitz Katan. The Tashbitz Katan is a Talmud of the Rami Rotenberg, and Rabbeinu Peretz wrote Haggayis on the Tashbitz Katan. In his Haggayis, he writes as follows: Miu, Kvar Nagu Rabbeinu Lasis Purim Ba'adar Rishon B'Yudalad Boy. Our Rebbeim were noyig to make some sort of Purim on Adar Rishon B'Yudalad Boy. L'inyan Achila V'Shtiya V'Lasis Suda Gedola. Now, this is already more than just these, adding a dish, adding Te'enim. Rabbeinu Peretz is saying, our Rebbeim were noyig to make a Suda Gedola on Purim Katan. V'chein haya ragul Rabbeinu Yechiel Mi Pariz. One of the Balei Tosfos. He says, this was the minig of Rabbeinu Yechiel Mi Pariz. L'harbis b'simcha v'suda ba'arba'asa shel Adar Rishon l'hazmi b'nei Adam Imoy. To invite people and to make a big Suda, to make a big deal about it. He would invite people, he'd make a big Suda, be marba b'suda on Adar Rishon. He says, Kidamash Manami Lashon HaMishnah, the Ein Bein V'chulu. Miu, says Rabbeinu Peretz, Suda G'dolei in Tzarech Lasis. As that grace the Suda you don't have to make. You can invite a neighbor, make epis and maskara, some sort of Suda, and call it a day. Now, and there's more of these different, bulletins that you'll find in Ashkenazi Svarim that say to make, Purim Katan Sudas. Now, it's an interesting thing. Is a diik in the Mishnah like that, right? The Mishnah is medoik like that. But Lamaisa, the Gemara clears it up, and the Gemara says that it's not Purim. So, what's the inyan of celebrating Purim Katan? What's the inyan? So the Chassam Sofer and his grandson, the Chassan Sofer, have fascinating things to say about this. I'll say the Chassam Sofer first. It's a straightforward piece, and the Chassan Sofer has a lot of extra credit. The Chassam Sofer says, he brings a raya that midei raisa, when something good happens to a person, you're mechuyev to say thank you. That's the din. If something good happens to a person, you're mechuyev to be made HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Says, but that is open-ended. You could say, thank God. That's it. You were yotzei the day raisa to chiyuv. Says Chazal come along and they craft yamim tovim around this chiyuv. Says B'kumta is the exact presentation of a yomtiv, if it's not a deraisa, like Purim for example, is all midrabanan. How exactly you alleviate your chiyuv of saying thank you is all derabanan in nature. Says, but on Adar Rishon Purim Katan, when you're saying thank you for the Nes of Purim and you're not doing it the way the Rabbanan set up Purim, because that's Adar Sheni, that's Purim, then you're being Mekayim the deraisa. So Chassam Sofer says it's an opportunity to be Mekayim just the deraisa in its unvarnished form. Like you're being Mekayim the deraisa of Purim, the deraisa of saying thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in its unvarnished form. That's a big opportunity. Chassam Sofer says this a few times. It's in a tshuva, it's in Megillah Davav, he writes this. So the Chassam Sofer has this idea that Purim Katan is like an opportunity to say thank you, unvarnished and untouched by the rest of the dinim and the rabbanas that are attached to Purim. Now the Chassan Sofer, he does something interesting. The Chassan Sofer brings a raya that the Purim of Purim was in Ibriyar. The year that Purim happened was in Ibriyar. He has diukim in the psukim. It says Alkain, it says Hashenis, and he says Ein Mikriyatim De Pshutai, and it means there was two others that year. And the Purim happened in a year of Adar Rishon and Adar Sheni. So he says, even though when they made the takana to celebrate Purim, they made it in Adar Sheni because Adar Sheni is kilu, the main Adar that comes every year, and Adar Rishon is the additional one, the Tosfos. But the Nes of Purim, in the way it really happened, was Adar Rishon with a repeat in Adar Sheni. So it's almost like, again, like his grandfather, it's almost like you're doing the Iker Purim is Adar Rishon. He says something else fascinating. He has a proof from a Chazal that Moshe Rabbeinu, we know Moshe Rabbeinu was born on Zayin Adar. He has a proof from a Chazal that Moshe Rabbeinu was born in an Ibriyar. And if Moshe Rabbeinu was born in Ibriyar, he was born on Zayin Adar, so his bris was Yud Daled Adar Rishon. So, what do you say? There was probably Rosh Chodesh. So this is a good shmooze. This is because the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh wasn't given yet. But Pashas, the idea of Rosh Chodesh exists even before that, meaning months are set up like that. The mitzvah to Mekadosh the Chodesh didn't exist yet. There's a lot of Rishonim, interestingly, Avanar, to handle if the mitzvah. Okay, it's a different. I'm not talking about that now. Different thing. But B'chalofen says the Chassan Sofer that if it was an Ibriyar, if Moshe Rabbeinu was born in an Ibriyar, so come to his bris was Yud Daled Adar. So Purim Katan is a celebration of Moshe Rabbeinu's Sudas bris. It's clearly being Mishat of Moshe Rabbeinu's Sudas bris, and he has even more of these that the Chassan Sofer comes up with to validate what the grace and mitzvah of having a yomtiv on Purim Sheni is. If the Gemara seems to rule it out. B'chol these are the different, kila rationales. Now, obviously, once there's minhagim like this, there's a ton of different additional minhagim that you'll find, like about celebrating Purim Katan. In Unsdorf, in Unsdorf, the minig was they would make a special type of liquor. They would drink. Some people had a special streimel. Some people had, different special minhagim of Sudis. I think the Stipler I saw, even the Stipler, but the Stipler came from Chassidish Stak. The Stipler would drink a little wine on Purim Katan. Many different people celebrated Purim Katan in their own different little ways. In Chabad, I think rather the Rebbe made Fabringens on Purim Katan a bunch of times, and he used to say, Zeh Katan Gadol Yeh. Like this Simcha Purim should be big, like it's unvinching the real Purim to come. In any case, this is one that actually makes it to the calendar in one way or the other. There are many, many more of these Purims, and there's really a halacha shmuz about the ability to be kaveh these Purims that I want to get to. So we'll continue this in Yitzhak Hashem.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.